trifle?
Yeah.
Birthday trifle week, I can't wait.
I
I'm having it
have more.
before lunch.
Huh? Oh, you're having it before?
Oh my God,
lunch?
Jane, you're fabulous. Right.
I picked those raspberries myself, but not this week.
I was gonna say, if you manage to
Jane.
get around, that's why you get pick this week.
You're magical. No, she freezes them.
Not living in the Northeast Kingdom, I can
Thank
tell you.
you.
Yeah.
That was a
Happy
huge,
birthday.
huge gift.
Happy birthday, Bob. Happy birthday, everybody. Everybody's born this month, except for me.
April is for cruise month.
I know.
When is your birthday?
All right. We're gonna get started. That was all live on YouTube. So
Today?
we went live just as Senator Kitchelwood came in the door. This is the Senate Government Operations Committee, and today is Tuesday, April 23rd. It is Senator Norris's birthday. Happy birthday, Senator Norris.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy
birthday to you. Happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Are you what?
We're not time for that.
So, all right, you need to get your minority leader into the like swing of things. So we're
Next year
celebrating
on the
birthdays
floor.
together.
Okay, but we are still live on YouTube. That was lovely. Everybody can replay that over and over and over again.
Oh,
We are gonna take up H 622. We have this bill very briefly because it needs to go on its way. So Representative Boyden, you wanna come on up and give us the overview? Thank you. This has made a little bit of a trip since your committee had it. So I know it went to a couple of committees over in the House and then also Health and Welfare Committee here. But why don't you just give us the framework and then we'll get into the details after.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
And for the record, I'm Representative Lucy Boyden. I represent Lemoyle 3, which is Cambridge and Waterville. And I'm coming to you from the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. So as the chair mentioned, H 622 is kind of a collaborative effort between the House Healthcare Committee, where the bill started. It then went to the House Government Operations and Military Affairs Committee, where it passed on the floor, but voiced unanimously. Went over to the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. And it now comes to you as part of this journey. So it's H 622 relating to emergency medical services mainly looks to equip the EMS Advisory Committee to evaluate the current state of the EMS system, expand training opportunities, and update the circumstances under which ambulance service providers are reimbursed for delivering services to Medicaid beneficiaries. And so in the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs, we heard a lot of testimony about what does an effective EMS system look like? And the base of it is really, it includes a timely, robust 911 response, large incident response, and medical transportation to definitive care. And we also heard a lot of testimony about how the EMS system in Vermont currently is kind of a patchwork. Across the state, EMS crews range from full-time to part-time to volunteer. Some volunteers pay for their own trainings out of pocket, some are awarded grants, and overall the funding system is inequitable, which causes volunteer retention issues, gaps in services, and then ultimately overlapping service areas as well. And overall, as we know, EMS is a really critical part of healthcare, a key service within communities across the state. So we're really optimistic and hopeful that H 622 is one of the many steps forward in investing in our EMS providers and for training and just overall best practices as well.
All right.
So I'm happy to dig into a couple sections, or I can name that to let council.
Yeah, why don't we leave it to let council, because there are a couple sections that are very specific that we're gonna look at.
Yeah, and then one more thing is
Yeah.
that the vote out of committee was 12-0-0, and that was the same out of the Ways and Means Committee, and I believe the appropriation. And then, like I said, it was a voice vote on the floor.
Okay. Are there any questions for Rep. Boyden? Okay, thank you so much.
No problem.
Appreciate your time. Yeah, and we got you off the floor for.
Yeah, I'll hang out for a little bit and then I'll
Excellent.
head back.
All right, Jen, you're great. Thank you. So I was hoping that you could give like a general, a fairly high level overview of the bill, except for the committee getting into the committee, and then when we get to the money part. And the reason is committee, there's a section of this bill that will sound very familiar because it's also in S310, but it's different than what's in S310. So part of our job is to try to reconcile the two and figure out which direction we want to go so we can recommend it to our money committees. Yes, Rep. Boyden.
I would just like to give a little context to us 310 is that we have changed it in the House. We voted out of committee today. And we changed the EMS section of that bill to match.
To match this, yes, okay.
Oh,
Yeah, but it doesn't match our version of it, so we have to figure out what we want to do. This, so that once we go through the bill, then I'll explain, okay?
Yeah.
I'm not even on the agenda.
I can put you on the agenda, I'm sorry, Nolan, I'm really sorry, you should be on the agenda, my bad. But Jen, go ahead.
All right, Jen Kirby from the Office of Legislative Counsel. So are you looking at, what are we looking at?
We're looking at the House passed version.
Okay.
And then I think that Olivia printed out the.
Yes, I'm seeing it
amendment.
here. I forgot about it. I'm not sure I have to print it out in my folder.
You're welcome.
Thanks you, I'm at far. All right, so we're looking at H 622 as by the House. This is an act relating to emergency medical services. It starts out in section 1 by amending an existing statute that sets out the policy for a chapter on emergency medical services. And this adds a purpose and some findings, and you can tell me you want to go into them or you don't want to go into them. I don't know how we say.
I don't think we need to go into the findings.
Section 2
Yeah.
is the Emergency Medical Services Special Fund, which will get referenced in that later section that I think is the one we have in 310. This is an existing special fund in Title 18. And under existing law, the money goes into it from the Fire Safety Special Fund. That's the one we're going to look at later. And under existing law, the commissioner administers it to support training programs, data collection and analysis, and other things relating to training of EMS and delivery of emergency medical services and ambulance services in Vermont. This would add some additional language directing the commissioner to prioritize using funds to provide grants to programs that offer basic EMS training at low cost or no cost to participants. So expanding the pool of folks who are trained in that area. Also directs the commissioner to make reasonable efforts to try to award grants in a geographically equitable manner across the EMS districts and provide technical assistance to districts that have had some trouble in the past accessing the funds.
Yeah, go ahead.
When they were thinking about geographic equitability, is that just so that there is a diversity throughout the state or in places that traditionally have not had access to it? Because my only concern is geographical equity could be good, but there are places that just, they're not in the same situation where they need this type of support, like, so you might, I just don't want us to be in conflict where we're trying to have every part of the state get access.
Reasonable efforts to award grants in a manner that supports geographic equity.
Okay.
I'm sort of paraphrasing as we go through, but that's what it says. Supports geographic equity among the districts, and then also providing technical assistance to districts to ensure that grants are available to support training in districts that have historically experienced challenges in receiving grants from the fund. Sections 3 and 4 deal with Medicaid, and this is where the Senate Health and Welfare Amendment comes in. So under existing law, well, under existing status quo, fairly recently, Medicaid has begun reimbursing for emergency medical services provided to a Medicaid beneficiary when there was no transportation involved, so treatment without transport. This language would say, to the extent permitted under federal law or waivers, the reimbursement rate for that treatment without transport would be in an amount equal to the Medicare basic life support rate, which is a higher rate than Medicaid is currently reimbursing that sort of services. Directing an increase in the reimbursement And then as Bill came over from the House, it said annually as part of its budget presentation, the agency food services need to report the amount of additional funds that would be needed to reimburse EMS providers at a level equal to the Medicare basic life support rate for all EMS services delivered to Medicaid beneficiaries. And just to put it in context, the health and welfare amendment would, instead of saying at a level equal to the Medicare basic life support rate, it would be a level equal to the applicable Medicare rate for all EMS services. So depending on the type of services, whether they were basic life support or advanced life support or something else that would trigger a different Medicare rate, what it would look like if we reimbursed in parity with Medicare and the Medicaid program. So that's the informational piece. It's not doing it. The actual increase is just for the basic life support rate for the treatment without report. Section 4 amends an existing statute that addresses some provision regarding reimbursement for ambulance service providers. And it says for Medicaid, look over at that statute be enacted in section 3. Section 5, I think 5 and 6 may be the ones the chair wants to go into in some more detail. Section 5 is amending the EMS Advisory Committee. And under existing law, there is an EMS Advisory Committee. The bill makes some really just housekeeping changes to begin with. Does not make any changes to the membership of the EMS Advisory Committee. It specifies on page 6 that the committee would have administrative, technical, and legal assistance from the Agency of Human Services. And under existing law, there's a long list of items that the committee has to report on regarding the EMS system annually to a number of committees, including this committee. And this bill, I think that some of the testimony was heard in the House that you may hear the same thing here is we've been reporting on the same information for years, sort of maybe time to be providing some different information. So it's striking out that existing report and it's instead directing the EMS Advisory Committee to develop and maintain a 5-year statewide plan for the coordinated delivery of emergency medical services in Vermont. And it would direct them to update the plan at least annually, and it must include specific goals for the delivery of EMS services in Vermont, a time frame for achieving those goals, cost data and alternative funding sources for achieving those goals, and performance standards for evaluating the goals. And a report will be due by December 15th of each year to the Commissioner of Health and the General Assembly that reviews progress toward achieving the goals in the 5-year plan and what the committee's goals are for the upcoming year. And that is it for that section as far as changes. So it doesn't make any changes to the EMS Education Council. Section 6 is some more work for the EMS Advisory Committee. This is a statewide EMS system design. And it directs the EMS Advisory Committee to do 2 things in this section. One is to collect the data necessary to conduct a complete inventory and assessment of the EMS services currently available in Vermont, including the number of full-time and part-time personnel currently performing those services, the current total spending on EMS in Vermont, itemized information, each emergency medical service regarding all applicable federal, state, and municipal appropriations, revenue sources, each contract for emergency medical services, and the projected budget for each service, and information regarding all identified gaps in services and overlapping service areas. So that's the first piece is the inventory and assessment, and that will have an earlier due date. Stop for questions.
Did somebody have a question?
So we're no longer, it's possible I'm missing it, we're no longer asking for response time.
It's less you. Sorry, Drew right now. Drew.
I think not as a standalone item, that may be something that's addressed in the 5-year statewide plan, as far as how long, what the goals are for
Yeah.
response times, what average response times have been, and what they're doing, making progress toward
Yeah.
achieving faster response times, but it's not called that. We don't believe it's called that especially.
Okay.
All right, so the first piece of this report in section 6 is the inventory and assessment. And then the second part on page 10 directs the EMS Advisory Committee to provide recommendations for the design of a statewide EMS system including recommendations related to a number of things. EMS district structure and authority, which might include recommendations on the number and configuration of EMS districts and their powers, duties, and scope of authority, workforce training standards, and other staffing best practices to support the retention and well-being of EMS personnel, a resource allocation plan that ensures emergency medical services are available in all regions of the state, a process for annually reviewing EMS providers' budgets, a governance model that provides for effective state and regional oversight, management, and continuous improvement of the EMS system, including identifying staffing and other operational needs to support the oversight and management of the system, cost estimates for implementing the recommended system in EMS system in Vermont, including operational and capital costs, facilitation and coordination of EMS training, including mobile training opportunities, and anything else the committee deems necessary or appropriate. It directs the EMS Advisory Committee to facilitate stakeholder conversations so that they can get information and recommendations about ways to achieve this coordinated statewide system, including proposals regarding district structure and authority, system costs, and funding options. As far as assistance, this will come with some money later on. It allows the EMS Advisory Committee to hire a project manager and other consultants with relevant expertise in EMS design and financing to assist the committee in its work under this section, and also gives them the administrative, technical, and legal assistance of the Department of Health and directs the department to do the contracting on the committee's behalf, project manager and other consultants. There are two reports of
Senator Watson, sorry, thank you. Back on page 10 on line 7, the EMS district structure and authority. I realize this is just a part of a report that they're making recommendations about this. I don't know that I have my question is still forming. I guess I'm wondering about just the different kinds of EMS types, some being municipally be under the auspices of a municipality versus like an enterprise EMS and
nonprofit and independent nonprofit.
Yeah, so anyway, I think I'm just flagging that. I just wanted to say out loud that I feel like calling that difference out may be useful because
Are you having a flash of deja vu?
I sure am.
Yeah. It's the same problem with our dispatch system and many other systems. I think that both Will and Drew might be able to hash out that question a little bit better than Jen can.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm mostly just bringing it up as a flag, but it's something that I think it's worth talking about.
Yeah.
And that would be a suggestion to some of the subject matter experts who may.
If I may, I think that's why looking at a statewide system or a regional system, which we had done a while ago. And it sort of fits into our county work also.
Yeah.
They grew up, if a municipality didn't do them. And a region needed them, I mean, that's the nonprofits grew up out of need.
Yeah.
So it's not like, I don't think they're working at cross purposes, but these
No,
guys.
I agree.
Confirm.
Interesting.
I think they complement each other and they do mutual aid and all that.
All right, so then we have two reports. The first due December 15th, 2025 is the inventory and assessment. And that would go again, I think, we held in the General Assembly. And then by December 15th, 2026, the committee would submit its design recommendations to the commissioner meeting.
Holy good job.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, go ahead.
Section 7 is the money piece. Sounds like you have some familiarity with with this money for the Vermont Fire Service Training Council. Under existing law, there's an amount paid into the Fire Safety Special Fund of not to exceed 1.2 million. This would increase that by 300,000 to 1.5 million. This is what gets paid in by insurance companies writing property and casualty insurance. And then you can see on page 13 that the entire $300,000 increase goes to the amount specifically allocated to the EMS Special Fund under Title 18, which we looked at earlier in the bill. So this increases that amount to be raised by the assessment on the insurance companies property and casualty insurance companies and directs it all to the EMS special fund. And then we're gonna look at how we spend the money here in the next two sections. Section 8 is the increase for the Medicaid treatment without transport. That the amount needed to increase that rate to the basic Medicare basic life support rate. And in FY 25, 74,000 in global commitment funds. I don't think this committee works a lot with global commitment funds, but that's the combined state and federal match that we have under Medicaid. So it's a total of 74,000 appropriated to DVA, the Department of Vermont Health Access, which administers the Medicaid program, for the increased reimbursement rate for EMS providers in section 3. For treatment without transport. And then B and C break out. The general fund piece is $31,206. And the federal fund component is $42,794. When you add those together, you get the 74,000. Section 9 is an appropriation for the EMS Advisory Committee. And so we're notwithstanding any provision in the EMS Special Fund or the Fire Safety Special Fund. To the contrary, of the funds allocated to the EMS Special Fund under that section we just looked at, 32 VSA 8557A4, which would go from its current 150,000 going into the EMS Special Fund to 450,000. Of that, in FY 25, 150,000 would be appropriated to the Health Department to support the EMS Advisory Committee in accomplishing the work set out for it in that section 6, the inventory and assessment and the design recommendations.
And the person.
Well, that's largely what it's part of. And then to the extent that there are unobligated funds in that EMS special fund, and this is part of what Nolan was talking about, in FY 25, up to an additional 220,000 would be appropriated and is appropriated and would be made available to the Health Department to support the advisory committee's work under that section, provided the total amount from the fund to support that work shall not exceed 370,000. That was 370,000 was the initial request that we put in the bill, and then this is a way to fund up to that amount using this allocation. Section 10, the act takes effect on passage, except the two appropriation pieces would take effect on July 1st.
Okay. Are there questions for Jen? So we're not gonna deal with any of the Medicaid stuff in here. That's what we did down the hall. So we're not gonna
Thank you.
those sections.
We're grateful.
Yeah, it's just this sort of study and advisory committee and then the special fund that we're gonna talk about a little bit more. Not the purpose, and there's no intent in the bill, Alice.
Thank you,
But there's
Jen.
always purpose.
Nolan, I'm sorry I didn't put you on the agenda. Will you come and
Yeah,
tell us what?
ask a question about the money piece.
Yeah, that's
So
what
for
we're
years
doing.
through, we had, I know there was an issue with transport. So people would arrive, assess the situation, EMS would arrive, assess the situation. And treat, but the person didn't need to be transported. Does this and they would not reimburse them unless they were transported. Is this covering them in this instance?
Yeah, and we're gonna get to Will and Drew later. We're talking to Nolan right now. So when
No, I know, but we just talked about the money, so I was just curious about.
Yes, that was earlier in the bill.
Yeah,
and there
we
was
just talked about that money piece
existing.
and we talked about grant, so I was just
Right,
curious.
so earlier in the bill, and when we talked about that, I've mentioned that there had not previously been reimbursement for treatment without transport, but
Right.
recently there has been, but it's not at it's at a lower rate than the Medicare basic life support rate. So this requires AHS to reimburse EMS providers for providing treatment without transport to Medicaid beneficiaries
It's
at
fast,
the
but-
Medicare basic life support.
Thank you.
Nolan, there is a fiscal note for the bill.
Yeah, it should be posted.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for having my back.
For the record, Nolan Langwell, the Joint Fiscal Office. First of all, this is my first time in this committee ever.
Oh,
Ever?
No, not ever. I mean, I was here, there, Jeanette White.
do you know everybody?
I believe I do.
Should
Although I never met Representative Norris.
Senator,
Senators,
Yeah.
we were one,
Uh,
a good start.
No,
Just testing you.
no.
Senator Bob Norris, Franklin County.
It's birthday Bob.
Well, I can't call him Bob.
Yeah.
All
And you know
right,
everyone else though? You've been.
I believe, I
there.
believe I know everybody
Okay.
else.
All right,
so-
well, welcome to Seneca Ops.
And for the record, Noel Langwell, the joint fiscal office. And you're sure you don't want to talk about global equipment? Just kidding.
No.
I'm just kidding. So I'm gonna talk, I know that you had similar stuff in S310, but I didn't come in here to talk about this. So I thought I would just briefly since I don't know what you do not know, I figured I'd quickly talk about how that fund works, where the money comes from, the base, et cetera. And then what this bill does. I'll try to, I kind of went through it, but I'm gonna try to do it a little slower or a little more, obviously never as good as Jen, but. So, currently there's $150,000 that is deposited to the EMS training fund every year. I believe you know this. That money comes from a $1.2 million that's collected from the insurers that goes to the Fire Service Training Council. The Department of Financial Regulations collects this fee from insurance companies that write fire, homeowners, farm owners, auto, marine, commercial, and other, basically other non-healthcare stuff. They have a formula for how they determine that. Basically, the way that works is there's about $1 billion base of premium. And they look at each company and what percentage of that base are they of the premium collected, and then they apply that percentage. So of that 1 billion, let's say there's a company that accounts for 20% of that in terms of premium. Well, they would be charged 20% of the $1.2 million.
Okay.
So it's relative to the percentage of the $1.2 million that they're charged by DFR is relative to their percentage of total premium collected in Vermont. There's about 297 companies that pay into this, the lowest being $21 a year and the highest being $79,000 per year. So you get a sense of the range of, and again, that's off of a base of about $1 billion. So of this $1.2 million, $100,000 goes to like entry-level firefighting training. $150,000 of that goes into the EMS training fund, and then the rest goes to the fire council. So what this does, well, let me give you a little history too. In my little bullet points that I've been using as I travel around. So the fire service training fee was initially established in 1993. It was initially $150,000. It was last increased in 2016, effective 2017, from $950,000 to $1.2 million. The EMS training fund was created in 2011 with $150,000 and has not increased since. So it's been the same $150,000 since 2011. So what this bill does is it increases that fee by $300,000 to $1.2 million. Actually, it's funny, we weren't sure whether to call it a fee tax or a bill back. I don't really know what to call it. And when I asked Ledge Council, they were like, we don't really know either. But it's assessed. So we call it assessment, whatever you want to call it. So DFR would increase the assessment from 1.2 to 1.5. An additional $300,000 would go to the EMS special fund. So what happens is in initial Gov Ops bill, they also had a general fund appropriation for $370,000 for the work of the task force. And when it went through the process, the House appropriations was trying not to increase general fund appropriations because they were trying to deal with the budget. So what was determined instead was that they would split that 300 in the first year only. The 150,000 of that would go towards this training council one time. The other 150,000 would go towards training. And then the year after that, all 300,000 would go towards training. Now, there's also language in there that to the extent that there's money available in the fund, additional $220,000 could go towards that task force. That was basically them trying to make that $370,000 whole, or make them whole, WHO, in the case that there's money. Now, traditionally, there has been money in the bottom line of the fund. For a while, there was actually quite a large balance, and that was due to technicalities. My understanding is that money had been spent down, but I'll let Will talk a little bit more about it because my understanding is they do like to leave some amount on the bottom line now for some other purposes. So to the extent that there's 220,000 or up to that much available, in the fund, then that much more could go to the EMS task force or to the task force. There's much,
So Nolan, the the funding is appropriated in FY 25, but they don't spend that whole amount in FY 26. They still would have, they,
the money is not swept, it is carried forward.
it's carried forward.
It's just
So
in the
they-
bottom line.
So the intent is to have $370,000 to cover the extent of the entire study. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that was the way to kind of cover the total costs. 370,000 was what was identified by, I guess, the EMS providers, et cetera, that would be needed to do this work.
Okay.
And this was a way of saying, well, there has been money on the bottom line, so if there is, it could go up to 370,000.
Okay, so if they spend up 200,000 in FY 25, they would have 170,000. Assuming there's balance in the fund, they would have.
Assuming there's a balance in the
170,000
fund,
left in
availability.
26.
The question that I would leave for Will is whether that's obligated or unobligated. I think it would probably be unobligated.
Okay.
So there's.
So in committee, and then moving forward, after the study is done, the assessment would stay the same and there would be a total of $450,000 available for the training.
Correct.
Okay.
The only thing that's one time is that one time 150 to the task force.
To the okay.
Yeah.
The advisory.
But the fund increases perpetually.
Okay. So committee, if you remember in S310, we had increased it by 150,000, so there was $300,000 going out to the future annually for training. We didn't deal with the committee thing, that was in still. So that's the big difference in terms of the actual money. Okay, any questions for Nolan?
Forgive me for calling.
It's not the next.
We're good. I was a representative a couple years ago, so
Oh,
I take no offense to that.
that's why I did it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very proud
You
of
have
us.
3 house trained senators.
Four,
That's right, 4, right.
the majority of this committee, which is what makes it so.
They were the weak.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nolan. All right, I can't remember who I had next on the agenda or who, Olivia had. Will, you are next.
All right, good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all today. Yeah, department appreciates the ongoing attention this committee and other committees are giving to this important issue and this important bill. I just want to know, we support the policies.
Wait, can you introduce yourself for the record?
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Will Moran, I serve as the Director of Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Injury Prevention at the Health Department. Thank you.
Yep.
So just to know, we support the policies outlined in the bill. However, we do want to know that funding is not included in the governor's budget. So this bill includes common sense enhancements, such as what is proposed in Section 3, reimbursement for emergency medical service providers. Not all requests for EMS response necessitate hospital-level care. One on-scene assessment, treatment, and resolution of a medical complaint is an alternative, in some cases preferable outcome, as admission to an emergency department is not always clinically necessary. In a treatment without ambulance transport scenario, EMS clinicians are providing basic and advanced patient assessment and treatment, and often in consultation with physician medical direction. Medicaid beneficiaries benefit from receiving high-quality care in their home, and the Medicaid program benefits from avoiding costly hospital admissions. Reimbursing EMS for this medical service is the right thing to do, and I also suggest this change is long overdue.
Yes.
The long-term financial viability of the EMS system depends on closing these historical reimbursement gaps. Section 2 outlines modifications to the special fund and how it is to be utilized and prioritized to support entry-level training. The EMS special fund has served as an important source of funding to support EMS personnel, and recent changes to how the EMS special fund and how we administer it has rapidly rated our ability to get funding out the door and to the folks who need it most. Since June of 2022, approximately $585,000 has been paid out or obligated to EMS training courses and programs all across the state. As a member of the EMS Advisory Committee, I'm committed to working with my colleagues in the committee to both identify additional strategies or modify existing strategies to maximize the effectiveness of state funding to support the training of EMS personnel. The rate of utilization of the EMS Special Fund and one-time funding suggests that an increase in the annual EMS Special Fund allocation would do more to deliver entry-level training and reduce access to training inequalities, as was mentioned before. Section 6 outlines a proposed framework for an EMS study and represents an opportunity to better understand and make recommendations on how to enhance our EMS system. Some Vermont communities have expressed a sense of urgency to reevaluate how EMS services are delivered, balancing various factors such as level of care, operational performance, and cost. Other communities have and continue to make the necessary investments to support and sustain local EMS service providers and personnel. The Emergency Medical Services System was established nearly 70 years ago, and while many aspects of our system have evolved over time, many aspects have not, and reform is certainly needed. We agree there is value and more important insights to be learned by carefully and thoughtfully studying various aspects of the EMS system. Today, EMS resides at the intersection of healthcare, public health, public safety, and emergency management. Structural changes such as system financing reform are necessary so to ensure the public continues to have timely access to pre-hospital emergency medical care, and the system can flex during a medical surge event, a mass casualty incident, or a disaster response like we saw last summer during the flooding. While we support the EMS study as it is proposed in the bill, our preference would be to divide the responsibilities to deliver study findings and recommendations between the advisory committee and the department. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, so on that last note, are you proposing a change to the bill?
So how are you gonna divide it?
So thank you, no, for the record, Brendan Adler, Policy Director, Department of Health. I think, as Will suggested, we are comfortable with that language. It's, it's slightly unique as far as I understand it, arrangement where the funding comes to the department, we're gonna do the contract, the administrative, legal, and technical assistance. And then ultimately the advisory committee will come back and do the work and provide the recommendations. There's a lot on the EMS advisory committee's plate through this bill, and we're just being thoughtful about their ability to execute that. I'm sure Drew will be able to speak to that more. I think a more traditional approach would be that the department does the EMS study piece, but as Will suggested, we're fairly comfortable with the approach.
Okay. Okay, and Will, you were reading your testimony, have you submitted that to him?
I have not.
Could you, that would be great. So are there any other changes that the department is suggesting or requesting at this point? You're comfortable with where it's at, but is there something that's other?
No, I think we're good. I mean, it would be great to hear Drew's thoughts on, the piece of dividing the study sections up. We've not had a chance to kind of dig into that with him specifically, given a lot of other competing priorities in the last few weeks, but we're open to that conversation, but otherwise, we see a lot of good in the bill and we're comfortable with it.
Okay. One of my concerns, or it's not necessarily a concern, but one of the things that I would like to see us do in this bill is, so we have an ongoing study, which you're probably aware of, about dispatch that started last year in this committee. And then we also did a bill earlier this session that's now over in House of Ops about county governance and regional governance study. And we, in this room, at least, see them all as linked, and certainly dispatch and EMS are linked. So we hate to see a study here, and a study here with no kind of integration. So at the very least, I would like to see language added that we might add to make sure that you are checking in with each other. Because because all of them are talking about governance structures, and I could see like, oh, the EMS governance structure, let's do this. And then there's a completely different thing proposed for dispatch. And then we're sort of back to square one of not having the appropriate coverage. Where you're maybe having somebody over here dispatch for an EMS system over here.
Mhm.
And that,
County system
and
over
that,
here.
yeah, exactly. So at the very least, as the GovOps committee, we want to make sure that these governmental. And I know EMS isn't always governmental, neither is dispatch.
Sure.
But we want to make sure the governance, sort of generically speaking,
Mhm.
is coordinated and connected in a way. So I think that would be, I think, certainly my priority, and I'm assuming the committee feels similarly, and just because we keep talking about this in here. Senator Watson, did you have a question?
I did have a question.
Remember?
But no, I didn't. So I'm taking it back. The confidence of Senator Watson, in which you said that.
Said what?
You said Senator Watson.
Oh, did
So I was like, that was lovely.
I didn't think you were melting.
I know, you should say that better. I mean, I was like, Not again, not
W.
Thank you. I had a particular question
Go for
about
it.
the reimbursement, for transport, but
Yeah,
I'm not
did-
sure.
for Will, or-
But I don't know, and I actually have to I'm about over my skis on this. So we're in a specific situation in Hartford where when we EMS transport to the VA, we don't get reimbursed. I'm wondering, do you know, does any of this affect that? Because those folks who are going to the VA are not on Medicaid
Right.
or Medicare, they're under a different,
They're under the
they're
VA.
under the VA. So this doesn't cover those situations.
Specific for Medicaid beneficiaries, so
Mhm.
it would not, this also would not impact those folks on Medicare. This is very
Yeah, okay.
specific to the Medicaid.
Okay,
There is legislation that's been offered by the congressional delegation that looks to achieve a very similar purpose, and that is specific to Medicare.
oh, okay.
So, but you bring it sort of another
Yeah, that's
angle on
another
this,
weird,
and that is the VA.
Yeah, and
That's-
unfortunately, both of Medicare and VA benefits are federal benefits, so we can't do anything with them,
Okay.
unfortunately.
Cause that drags down, if I remember correctly, in Hartford, like we couldn't, we had to basically offset the revenue that we lost.
Mhm.
Or not even revenue is the right word, but like the payment for service, because we were transferring to the VA, so, okay, thank you. That's, darn, we didn't fix that.
Well, we can't.
We can't, yeah, exactly.
Senator Clarkson, I see.
Yeah, I can't underscore Ruth's point enough, because as you know, in this committee, as Drew knows, for years, we have been looking at how we can coordinate this all regionally. Originally, we were doing all public safety, that's where we began. So it really, to align delivery and service and make it far more seamless and effective, it's just such a high priority, and our county bill, our county governance really fits nicely into some of this, particularly as you're looking at a statewide plan. I wouldn't jump statewide yet, I'd also look. Well, maybe county is part of statewide, but
When you look across the country, right, in those states that have an established county government system.
that's
you
where it
often see
resides.
County
Yeah.
EMS, system, county fire systems, right, and the benefit, one of the benefits of that is you move more towards an economy of scale and the ability to more efficiently utilize resources, not only physical resources, but staffing resources.
Of the volunteers, I
Oh
mean,
my gosh, we should have had you in to testify.
Yes.
The county bill, what you just said
Yeah.
was basically exactly why we were
Yeah.
looking at that.
Yeah, I
You know.
I don't know a lot about the bill, but it doesn't seem like you're creating something new. I think we're looking at ways that other states have utilized those mechanisms, those structures to effectively and efficiently coordinate all of the things you mentioned, right? Not just EMS, not just the fire service, incorporating emergency communications, recognizing like those are all pieces of the puzzle that fit intricately together because they need to work seamlessly when there's a crisis.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I think the various studies you mentioned, I think we're all looking for the same type of efficiencies. But I think your point about making sure there's connections and bridges between those studies to account for those gaps, so we don't end up here again in
Yeah.
the future to continue to discuss those,
We've got to get beyond the
yeah,
discussion.
those problems that have plagued our system for so long.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll certainly put some language in about that. Senator Vihovsky.
I appreciate all of the sort of fine nuance of trying to figure this out and that county governance might be really helpful. My question sort of goes back and it's a little bit in line with Senator White's and also probably more a question for the healthcare committee. So this deals with Medicaid, but what about private insurers? Can we do anything about that? Does it do anything about that?
So some private insurers do pay for treatment and no transport. When I was the ambulance service chief, on a per transport basis, our billing company would look basically at the details of a beneficiary's plan. And if they had that, or we would always bill it, but we would not seek reimbursement for those patients who did not have that benefit. If they had the benefit, we would not leave the money on the table, right? And many of those plans include treatment or provisions for treatment and no transport. So the private industry has to some degree addressed it, but it's not universal.
Can we make it? We require.
We have a very small slice that we can control. We can't do high deductible plans. We can't do ERISA plans, which are self-insured. We can, on this case, we can.
It's the cost sharing that's the issue with that.
Okay, so it depends on the high deductible plans. We can't do the self-insured or ERISA plans because they're federally overseen. So we could do a small slice, but we would have to take a lot more testimony. We didn't really get to that issue. We were focusing on Medicaid down the hall. So it might be a next year problem.
It's been an ongoing problem.
Yeah, it just feels like there's so many spaces where some of it's covered, some of it's not covered. And like, I certainly know that our emergency responders on the ground are gonna provide the care needed regardless. But that harms them on the other end or it creates a conflict. So the more
Yeah.
universally we can apply healthcare, the better.
As Jen and Nolan know, this is like the conversation we have kind of over and over and over and over again in Health and Welfare Committee. On no matter what it is you're talking about, doulas or weight loss drugs, EMS, whatever it is, it's the same kind of conversation.
It just seems like EMS, due to the way, and my understanding is it's a little bit due to the way that it's federally funded too, that they are often at like really getting the brunt of these things and like really being largely underfunded for the work that they're doing.
I think that's probably a pretty universally accepted struggle that regardless of the type of EMS service you are, I think folks have concerns about adequate levels of funding. So to be able to provide the level of service performance that they would choose to provide the community or that the community suggests that they would like.
Yeah. Senator Watson, did you?
Yeah.
You are Senator Watson.
Yeah, I was hoping I so checked, yeah. Thank you. So reflecting on another set of studies that just happened in December that has resulted in the housing bill, basically. There were 3 studies that magically came together and, well, I shouldn't say magically, it was with a lot of effort and work and coordination, that those studies, there were 3 studies that came to very similar conclusions, and that's why we have this reform bill. Thinking about the studies that we have in play, and one of the reasons that was successful was because I think it was really clear what the problem was on both ends of the spectrum, right? Housing crisis, and we're chopping up our forests, or the critical resources that we have are not getting the protection we need. And those things were in balance with each other. So thinking about like how can I'm trying to
Do you think
more
we need
than
the
that.
10 language?
Well, there is a purpose at the beginning, right? And so, one of the things that I am thinking about is particularly for the design recommendations, I think it would be, well, this is my question really.
Sure.
And I guess I'm projecting here. It seems to me that it would be useful in those design recommendations to spell out what is it that you're trying to optimize in the design. And that could be clarified, because the purpose, and it is just one sentence, is to provide comprehensive and effective emergency medical services and to ensure optimum patient care. Maybe that is sufficient. Maybe that is all we need to be the input for a design recommendations. Maybe it should be more spelled out. Do you see goals being in tension with each other? There would be trade-offs that would be helpful for us to.
I think yes and
Later?
yes.
Okay.
Right. I mean, I think when it comes to one of the unique things about EMS is that when you look across the state, community by community, it looks different, right? What the city of Hartford may choose to deliver or how they deliver emergency services looks different than a Glover ambulance, or I'm sorry, the town of Glover, right? So the needs of one community are going to vary from the needs of the next community. That can, when it comes from a objective standpoint or a desired outcome standpoint of a study, that's where time and space will be needed to develop consensus, and recognizing that there will be a level of flexibility to account for the community by community choices that folks across the state make about how EMS is delivered. Does that help?
It does, because and it resonates with me in that the needs of, like, if we were to say you should optimize the system for X, Y, and Z, that may not be the priorities of all communities around the state. And so then how do you?
Well, I think there are areas we can coalesce, though. I think if and I would point us towards a visionary document that our EMS colleagues across the country created, which is EMS 2050. And that is a visionary document of what an EMS system should be or should include by year 2050. And things such as a patient-centered EMS system. And there's various components of it too. Well, components of it speak to the clinical and patient-centered outcomes versus, cost is always going to be a variable you have to take into account. But how do we find a balance between the cost of the system and still being able to achieve our desired clinical outcomes? And I think oftentimes folks feel the budgetary pressures, and that oftentimes is the piece that people can most often or most easily relate to, right? Because it hits them where it hurts, right, in the wallet. And what is, I think, more difficult to conceptualize is, if we were to coalesce around ideas around reducing, the time of onset of symptoms for someone suffering from a heart attack to when they are rolled into a cath lab and an artery is reopened, right? We focus on those type of EMS system outcomes where, we're really talking about delivering the most appropriate and most effective care to the folks who need it the most. That's where I think we have opportunities to coalesce. Additionally, I think every service, regardless of the model, how your system or service is financed is probably equal. Like that concern is shared equally, right? Because whether you're talking a municipal service that's relying upon municipal tax dollars or a not-for-profit relying on municipal subsidies, right? In the end, it's the taxpayer who's writing a check. And one way or another, those funds are being diverted, or not diverted, those funds are finding their way to that service. So I think looking at how we fund EMS is another opportunity for coalescing around. And I think there's some fundamental system reforms we need in that. And then I'll move on. But the last thing I mentioned, and our EMS district system was designed decades ago. For an EMS system that looks very different than what we have today. I think there's also opportunities to coalesce there around how we both administrate and regulate our EMS system, because that framework and those guardrails affect everyone. Not only for the folks that are delivering the services, but also it impacts the people who are the recipients of those services. Because there are times where we have arbitrary boundaries, and without other statutes that require, just for example, right, the closest, most appropriate unit to be dispatched. we may arbitrarily be adding minutes onto a response when you could have a clinical situation where time is truly of the essence. And we're sending a unit that is further away simply because of arbitrary boundaries. And I would argue a system that just has not evolved enough yet to meet our expectations.
Cool, thank you.
All right, well, I think we're gonna turn to Drew at this point and then maybe talk about what, if any, changes you want in the bill, because unfortunately, committee, you don't have much time with this because it needs to head to the next door, to
Stop
two
on its
other,
journey.
yeah, it's two other journey to stops. Drew, thank you for joining us from wherever you may be. And if you want to just introduce yourself for the record and tell us your perspective on this bill, that'd be great.
Great. So Drew Hazelton, I am the chair of the EMS Advisory Committee. I also Chief of Operations at Rescue Inc. I'm actually down in Nashville right now at the Ambulance Association Conference, learning about all the fun and exciting problems the federal government is causing us in the future. So, and I'm sure we'll bring some of those back to your committee so you can help us solve them soon. A couple things I wanted to add. The advisory committee has been doing a lot of good work over the last few years, certainly with help from this committee. We started working on EMS issues quite a few years ago, introducing the Vermont First Responder Program, updating our EMS ICs and education system. And that was done, again, with kind of legislative support and funding, and also collaboration from the stakeholder groups that are represented as part of the EMS Advisory Committee. The makeup, which again, this bill doesn't change, does reach out to every stakeholder group, including every district, all the professional associations, the hospital association, the League of Cities and Towns. So we've got a wide representation. We've been able to do some important work. And as this bill has been kind of moving its way through the State House, we've been talking a lot about it. We've developed a work plan, strategy as to how we're going to get the work done. As you've noticed, there's a lot of work in this bill. We're excited about doing that work. We're excited about having some resources to be able to kind of get some boots on the ground and get us the information that we're looking for. I guess I want to also highlight that our work with the health department has been really important through the last few years. I just listened to, I think, a very detailed conversation about kind of the state of EMS in Vermont from Will, and I think it's important to note that the EMS Advisory Committee and the Health Department work very close on these issues. So I'm looking forward to being able to work with them on these reports as well. I could get into kind of the state of EMS in Vermont, but I know you have all listened to me explain that to you over and over again. So EMS in Vermont is still challenging. Adding the reimbursement for treatment without transport is a huge victory for EMS in Vermont and will help us sustain into the future. Increasing the special funds, which I greatly appreciate the work you did in 310, will help us maintain our workforce. We're still losing 25% of our, or 30% of our workforce every year. That's not just Vermont, that's nationwide. So having the funds to help us kind of continually reinvest in the workforce, continue recruiting is critically important. So I'll just answer questions, but from my perspective, I think the bill addresses most of what we need to address this year, and I appreciate the work you're doing on it.
Well, thank you, Drew. I'm wondering if you could address the question or the thought that Brendan Atwood had from the department about whether or not this was too much work for the committee and it should be more balanced with the department doing some of it. Do you feel like this is too much for the committee, or is the balance off?
I think there's going to be a lot of collaborative work with the health department. They're not off the hook in this. I lean pretty heavily on them all the time to help us out with projects. So I think there's going to be plenty of shared work. I'm okay with the way the language is written. I think it does engage the stakeholders in the process. I think there's a lot of talent in Vermont EMS that we can bring to bear to kind of answer these questions. So I like the language the way it is, and I'm certainly not thinking we're letting the health department off.
Okay. And does that satisfy you too?
We're
Well, Brenda.
yeah, Madam Chair, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Drew. Are there any other questions for Drew? Okay, so the amount of funding for the training moving forward, if it were to stay at 450 into the future, feel like you could spend that money? Oh, I'm throwing you a softball here.
So easily, it's costing us about $4 million a year to provide initial and ongoing education to EMS in Vermont. So in the last few years, you guys have given us $500 or $1 million a year to help support EMS education outside of the special fund. We've used that money to try to maintain our workforce over the last 4 or 5 years. The rest of that money is coming through fundraising efforts, through municipal appropriations, as well as individuals paying for their own initial and ongoing education. So increasing the special fund from 150 to 400 or 450 certainly is a step in the right direction, but it's not doesn't fill the entire void yet.
Okay, okay. And Will, are you the one that oversees that fund?
Yes.
More or less?
Yes.
You check on the balance, and
We
do you
do.
know what the balance is right
Yeah.
now? Did you say this, Nolan? I'm not sure.
I did not.
Okay,
So it's sitting at 102,000. So the way so there's really kind of 2 important components to the special fund. There is the direct funding that we that our plan has historically leaned on to push special fund dollars to the EMS districts. And on an annual basis, every one of the 13 EMS districts is entitled to $9,000. Historically, the number of districts that pull down that $9,000 varies year to year. But so if we're talking, say, for example, 2023, so an EMS district has that year to basically spend money first and then apply for reimbursement from the health department. They can apply for that reimbursement at any time during 2023, but the deadline to submit their application is the end of February in 2024. So we have to hold basically the unobligated portion that potentially could go out until the end of February. After February, the unobligated portion now essentially becomes entirely unobligated, and then we can take it and use it to, hire the Vermont EMS Academy to put on EMT classes or, critical care paramedic training from the University of Vermont. So there's that portion of it, which is the district piece. And then the more recent work we've done, which is where the department takes the lead on identifying contractors to deliver focused EMS training, geographically or, to meet a specific need, like growing the number of critical care paramedics. And over the last, since June of 2020, that's what we've been doing. So the fund was in February, in the early part of February, the fund was spent down to $12,000 from a high of nearly 700 when you and I, or when we last met with this committee 2 years ago. So we've been doing everything we can to identify training needs and push the money where it needs to go. And I'd say we've effectively done that, and that's the methodology that we're continuing to use.
okay. So in the bill, it sort of hopes and dreams for the 220,000.
Right.
Is that gonna be possible? Or are you gonna have to hold back on other things to make that happen?
So, to be frank, I think, this is a great opportunity for us to work with the advisory committee to develop a plan. So, because to be frank, we could spend that money down for training, right? We can push out more than $1 million between the one-time funding and the special fund. So we know there is a tenacious appetite for training. Spending that down is not a problem. If through our collaborative effort with the advisory committee, if we think there's going to be additional funding past the initial 150,000, it will need to be a deliberate choice to hold that
Yeah.
money to
Okay,
continue to work with contractors.
so you'll have to make that tough choice.
Yes,
Collect-
ultimately, yes, yeah,
Okay.
it will be a collective decision, but as Drew alluded to, I mean, this is an example of the relationship that we have is the foundation for that conversation.
Okay.
And the advisory committee, as Drew said, represents every EMS district and all the stakeholder groups, so everyone will have an opportunity to weigh in.
Okay, great. All right, thank you, Drew, and thanks again, Will. So committee, but do you have a question, Senator?
No, I hate, it's so bright.
Oh. Do you want,
Do you need my eyes? I don't know why.
do you want some sunglasses?
No, that I have in my pocket. I'm not wearing sunglasses. Just one side of the view would be so nice. Thanks.
Yeah. No problem.
Perfect.
Okay, committee, so two questions I'm hearing, unless there's something else, one is, are we comfortable with in section 7 of the bill,
Okay.
on page 12?
Yeah.
So it's section 7 is what increases the assessment. And then it's section 9 that appropriates it. And so this is, we heard Rep. Boyden say that they changed S 310 to match this bill. Are we comfortable with where this is, or do we wanna make changes to it? So. I'm comfortable. You're comfortable?
Yeah,
I mean, I think EMS as much as we can.
I was gonna say, my only invitation is if.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we have the option right now of going higher at this point in the sketch, especially since this is double what the Senate already passed. So, and if we are gonna go higher, it's gonna be the other committee that makes that decision, but,
We can recommend.
we could recommend, but I feel like we would be going out on a limb at this point.
No, but being consistent, this is consistent with what's come out of this committee for years.
Yes, and this is, this builds on frankly what we did in S 310.
Yeah.
So, Senator Vygotsky, are you comfortable with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I share the space reference committee sits in is, hearing what we're hearing as much as we can get to our EMS providers, knowing the really complicated landscape. In this building, I'm already done, let's do it.
Okay, Senator White? Got your name right. Senator Norris?
Well, I'm not, I'm full support of the EMS system. I'm not in favor of doubling anything, but. So these monies come through.
It's not what I've heard. Yeah, so this, as you'll recall from our work on S 310, there's this larger fund that covers fire training and safety and EMS training, and it's an assessment on all of the property insurance or most of the property insurance plans, companies that issue plans in the state. And it's proportional, as Nolan was explaining.
Then they're gonna find this hard to believe, then I can go on with the 1.5. As long as it's coming to the insurance companies, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean,
Incorporated.
it's not a new thing,
Yeah.
it's not new, it's just a little bit of an increase. It's for EMS, so, okay, cool, and Senator Watson?
I didn't.
Clarkson? Oh, you
Cool
are.
beans, we're cool beans on this
Okay,
side.
so
We're
sounds
even
like we're
line.
good with that, so I think the one change I would like to make is,
Will.
even though I trust that you all heard us when we said we wanted to coordinate, I think we need language in the bill that does actually link the studies a little bit more.
Yes, I would.
So Jen, I can work with you on that, but it's S 159, which Tim Devlin drafted, and that the House Committee has not yet passed that, but I hope they will. And it's a study about county and regional governance.
Oh, great, okay.
And then the dispatch study that's happening in the Department of Public Safety. It's, there's a it's between, co-chaired by the E911 Board of the Department of Public Safety. And it's already happening, and Maria Royal would know the information on that.
Alright, so S, we're basically gonna describe, just coordinate with these other types of things.
Yeah, that they need to, I don't know exactly what the language is that we want, but it's sort of, coordinate the work and the outcomes, as, with each other, so. And Will, you're okay with that? Drew, are you okay with that? I know you were in
Yes.
here all the time last year on dispatch, so.
He's a permanent place in this committee.
As Will said, dispatch and emergency communications is key to the future of EMS, so I think they absolutely need to be coordinated.
Yeah, okay. And the county governance study is much broader than public safety work. It's also, governance, you name it, it's kind of in there in terms of stuff that happens at the local and regional level. But I think this is a large part of it, is public safety. So, okay. So committee, are there any other things that are sort of in our wheelhouse that we want to set our wants on?
Thank you. So kind of getting back to what I was alluding to earlier, I mean, so there's a whole bunch of points on page 10 about the advisory committee providing recommendations. Maybe this is obvious. Going back up. Some of these bullet points have sort of purpose built into them, but I guess I would just love a link back to the purpose at the beginning. Just to say that we're aiming to ensure optimum patient care in the general redesign of as a purpose for the outcomes or for the outcomes of each of these recommendations.
Okay, so maybe an overarching, what patient-centered?
Sure. I mean, that was a phrase that has come up, patient-centered outcomes or
and national best practices.
Yeah.
Maybe you can link it to
Sure.
that's sort of a nice umbrella term.
Sure, or I mean, ensure, the purpose includes ensure optimum patient care. So just even, maybe this is not necessary because the purpose applies to the entire bill.
Our purpose applies to the chapter in Title 18, and this is a provision of session law that you're looking at.
Okay,
So
Yeah,
I think it would be fine
Yeah.
to make a reference in this session law section to the purpose in 18 VSA 901.
Yeah,
And, that aligns with purpose
oh, that's,
or something like that.
yeah, right.
Okay.
and then does the purpose in 18 VSA 901 include patient-centered care and national best practices in there?
Not specifically, I'm not sure if patient-centered care is the term you want, because I think most care is patient-centered.
I'm just using the buzzword that we would call it.
Well, as opposed to transport, which, I mean,
Well, it says optimum patient care.
Right.
So that ensures optimum patient care and based on national best practices.
That's fine. I just wanted to maybe some
Okay.
guidelines for like
purpose.
the purpose
It
of.
is consistent.
So then we'll link the study, when Jen drafts, she'll link the study back to this purpose.
Yeah.
Okay,
Good idea.
okay, perfect. All right, we all good with that? Because I think we're gonna come, Nolan, is there anything we should know? Okay. I think we're gonna come back to this bill tomorrow if we can, to mark it up and vote it out, because, so it can move on its way to the other committees.
Good idea. We're right behind you.
Okay, awesome. That sounds great. Thank you, everybody. We can